together today. We pray that you will bless our time together. Pray that you will try to help all of us to have better understanding of the things that are going on in the world, particularly in light of what your word says about how the world will be as we approach the return of the Lord. Bless us today, in Jesus' name, amen. Well, today, and this is not my title, somebody sent this to me. I'm going to let him or her remain anonymous for the time being, and there shall be speculations and rumors of speculations. You know, there shall be wars and rumors of wars. Well, it certainly seems like we're living in a time that there are speculations and rumors of speculations, particularly in the fog of war that we're in. I'll explain a little bit more about it in a moment. Just a reminder, some of the channels that we're on. We talk each week about the convergence of events and how quickly things seem to be happening, and how for a long time now we've been talking about a very disrupted world. Now, just a reminder, I say this every week. This is just the framework that I use. It's not gospel or anything like that. It's just how I sort of look at things. I think as we get closer to the return of the Lord, and actually I talk a little bit about this next week when I do the sermon first hour, talking about the triumphant entry of Jesus into Jerusalem, because that set off a period of time that fulfilled about 60% of the prophecies in that last week, from his triumphal entry until his resurrection and then ascension. About 60% of the prophecies in the Old Testament, many of which had been around for a couple thousand years in some cases, those prophecies, 60% of them were fulfilled in that last week. Now I believe that Jewish eschatology sets forth a pattern. And that pattern, you can look at what happened previously. So for example, I've done a talk on Ezekiel 23 and Ezekiel 8 and 9, talking about how the fact that what was going on in Judah at the time of the Babylonian captivity, just as the Babylonians were coming in to take Jerusalem and Judah captive, will be a picture, a pattern for how things will be in the church as we get closer. And if you read Ezekiel 8, you'll see that there was just this horrific apostasy. Ezekiel 23 talks about that too. It talks about the northern kingdom represented by one sister, who the Bible says was a whore. She was a prostitute, and she prostituted herself. She represented the northern kingdom of Israel. The southern kingdom was represented by her other sister, her younger sister, who was also a whore, a prostitute, and how they played the harlot with the nations around them, and God eventually judged them. That will be a picture of the apostasy in the church. And how many examples do we have to bring each week? I just saw an article before I came in here about a guy named Peter Scazzero. Peter Scazzero has written a book called The Emotionally Healthy Church, or Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. Marcia Montenegro references him in a column at her Christian Answers for the New Age Facebook page, and I think it's on her blog as well. And I wrote a long paper 12 years ago, about my concerns with Peter's, in part because the spiritual formation program at a seminary, and how people like Peter Scazzero were being brought in, which at that time he was just teaching a sort of a sanitized version of the Enneagram, which is rank New Age, pagan spirituality. And now we have these people running around promoting it. It's at Christian colleges and universities. It's in churches. And a couple of weeks ago, I made reference to Andy Stanley. I stand by what I said. I got some emails. Well, if you just played 30 more seconds, everything would have been okay. Now, 30 more seconds of Andy Stanley won't clear up the damage that he's done over the years. And he's a big promoter of the Enneagram. He even did a conference a number of years ago. And now what's the name of that conference? Do you remember, Pam? Catalyst, thank you. The Catalyst conference that he holds. And there he gave a a coupon for a 3-pack of Enneagrams for the church staff that you could do when you went home. That would have been back about 2015, I believe. He had Philemon Hurwitz came, who led them in a centering prayer, which is Roman Catholic mysticism. And she'll get on. I've played clip after clip of her where she will talk about, I have this, Richard Keating. I've learned so much from Father Keating. He's a Roman Catholic mystic. And they also cite Richard Rohr and Thomas Merton and all these other people. And this stuff is infused in the church. And so Andy Stanley is one of the big promoters of that. I was messaging back and forth with someone. She says, I showed that to my pastor. And he said, well, I went to that conference. I don't remember anything about that. Well, look in your experience package. It's right there. I've downloaded it. I know what's there. I don't make these things up. Now, you can question my interpretation. That's fine. But there is an acceleration of things. So like this apostasy that's growing in the church, it will really accelerate as we get closer. And there'll be a convergence. All of these different lines of prophecy, the alignment of the nations, the things are going on to set up the beast system, wars and rumors of wars, the logistics, the beast system architecture will be formed before, I think, the structure of it, the base structure of it will be before the beast comes on the scene. But then also as we get closer, we're going to have a better understanding, as it says in Daniel's chapter 12 and 11, that, listen, those who are going back and forth through the book, they will understand. Now, the earlier passage in Daniel, I don't have a slide of it, it says that men will run to and fro and knowledge will be increased. Now, I think that operates on a number of levels. I think sort of the simple way that verse can be interpreted, and I have no problem with people who interpret this way, is that knowledge will increase in the end times. Now, one thing to be, and we see this, I mean, I'm getting ready to do a seminar on technology for lawyers, and we look at the amount of information that we have. I used to write 25 letters on a case that lasted 2 years. So I'd have a little file. A couple of years ago, I had to produce my emails with regard to a particular matter that I was working on. And we had like between my client and I, we had like 4,000. I didn't used to write 4,000 letters because you had to type it up, somebody had to type it up, somebody had to punch holes in it, put it in a correspondence file, keep it in order, that type of thing. But now, with the ease of just, and you can see it on the internet, you can tell the people are posting things without really thinking about them, right? They just kind of boom, 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 and hit send. So there's the one way of looking at this passage in Daniel is that knowledge will increase, and it does. Go look at this, talk about them all the time, those big buildings that have servers out there on Beach Road in New Albany that just store bits and bytes of information. Those didn't used to exist. The first time I got a computer, I was at a law firm, and we had less than a gigabyte of storage on the entire network for almost 100 people and their computers, if you added everything up. Now that's like your phone is like, 64 to 500 to 1,000 times more than that just on what you put in your pocket, let alone what's on your computer. Also important to remember, though, it says knowledge shall increase. It doesn't say that wisdom will increase. And that's pretty true. In fact, I have one example of that right off the bat. This strange world. This is pictures of two people who were in the news this week, both males. On the left, Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services, named by USA Today as Woman of the Year. On the right, Leah Thomas, who was ranked, I think, 250th to 450th when Mr. Thomas was swimming as a male, that he was born. Because of COVID, he got time off. He took some hormone treatments, but that didn't change the fact that he went through puberty as a full-blown male. Males are generally stronger than females. Although we had a cab driver down in the Caribbean once, and I wouldn't want to take her on. I mean, I went to get the suitcase, and she just kind of stiff-armed this thing out of the back of their station wagon. But he just won one of the women's swimming events at the NCAA championships. So a lot of people were tweeting out the young lady who really finished first. And this is destroying women's sports, and nobody can seem to see this. So we have this verse when we know that this is going to be understanding. The wise will understand. There will be increasing number of people who are wise and understand what's going on. And it also says in chapter 11, passage leading up to that people shall instruct many. And I've talked about, so in this framework that I use, we talk a lot about the 4 horsemen that are riding. And there's people speculating now, are the seals open? I personally, I don't think so, but I think the horsemen are mounting up. And we don't know exactly how this unfolds. So my own view is that I probably should have flipped that up the other way, because I think that the first horseman comes, then the second, the third, the fourth, and that they're all kind of active in the world at the same time. And so there's everything that's talked about with regard to that seal will increase, and eventually, it gets to a point where they're all converging, and that's a very turbulent world. It's already a turbulent world. Things change quickly. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about some of the speculation that I see going on. I don't know if it would be a blessing or a curse to let you see my email on a week, or my messages on a weekly basis. And I don't mind people writing to me. I don't. And I appreciate it. I get there's a few things today, like the title that was given to me by somebody else, and I thought that's pretty good. But one thing that I've noticed is that it's hard to have a conversation, particularly about something like the war in Ukraine and some of the details that are going on there. I've seen people in Facebook groups that I belong to, somebody says it was okay for Putin to go into Ukraine. Another person will post, Putin is a war criminal. I hope God deals with him. And then somebody will respond, you're against Putin. He's a great Christian man. I hope you will be judged and go to hell for what you've just said about Vladimir Putin. And so the whole conversation blows apart. And we can't have a reasoned conversation about this. Listen, I don't think there's really anything specific with the Ukrainian war that's related to Bible prophecy, except that it has completely changed the world in the space of about 3 weeks, the whole world order. And now, where is that going? We'll talk about some of these speculations today. But here's some things. This is a street scene in Hong Kong. And immediately, as soon as you post this thing, what happens? Oh, that's fake. It's just not real. It's just not happening. It is. Hong Kong's having a tremendous surge in Charlie Vector cases. China has pursued a zero Charlie Vector policy. Charlie Vector is the sickness that you get from a certain virus, and we try to avoid the sensors, which will be tripped over by this. But Hong Kong is really having a tough time. Look at this chart of cases of Charlie Vector. This is just what's happened in the last couple of weeks. Now, you can always look you see the numbers, it's 35. So it's not 35,000, but it's still this increase. China, this was a report that I saw this week. China is currently building hospitals. The word I saw, I think it's true, in one large city, they're building in about 7 to 10 days, they will build a 6,000 bed hospital. Now, I'm sure the quality is not that high, but they anticipate that they need a hospital where they're going to care for a lot of people very quickly. They did this early on. And the hospital, it was built terribly. So, let's see, there's a couple other. Oh, well, so we talk about what's the next thing to happen. Remember the narrative changed? All we talked about was Charlie Vector for a while, then all of a sudden it was like, well, the war in Ukraine started to get on everybody's thing, and then it changed overnight. It was like, did anybody remember there was a Charlie Vector thing running around for a couple of years, and people had to wear things on their face when they went into stores and stuff? I remember I went to Costco yesterday, or earlier this week, and it's like everybody had a face. And listen, there's a study out from, I think it's Brown University, that says what has happened to children in schools, and they're still forcing kids in New York City to wear these things. Their IQs are down over 20 points. That's like moving somebody from high intelligence to medium intelligence. That's the average. Kids are having trouble communicating. And were the tech companies behind it? Well, go home and you can get on your phone and see people with our apps and everything. I don't know. I'm speculating, right? But there's a lot of things. And so now the narrative is changing. And, the war is the reason for everything going wrong. Even though prices were spiking, there were supply chain shortages, now it's all Vladimir Putin's fault. And the war is certainly going to contribute and exacerbate whatever problems we had. But the other narrative and this is from the Times of London, work from home to halt crippling oil shortage. So the IEA, the International Energy Agency, has come out, and governments around the world are pushing this now, a 10-point plan to cut oil use, reduce speed limits on highways by at least 10 kilometers per hour. It sounds like we're back in the days of Jimmy Carter. 55 mile per hour speed limit. You remember that thing? Make public transport cheaper. Incentivize micro-mobility, walking and cycling. That's great, unless you live 5 miles from a store. But our Secretary of Transportation, he says it would be great. And by the way, if you have trouble with gas prices, just go buy a Tesla. Stephen Colbert, I have a Tesla, $150,000 Tesla. That works for everybody, right? That's the common man's car. I crack up every time I see one of those things driving around. And they're beautiful cars. I kid you not. I mean, I'd love to have one. But I can see my wife back there. No. Like when we rode out west last year, we went out on a trip. I mean, we couldn't have taken that trip with a car like that. We've had to double or triple the number of days we were on the road because you got to charge the thing. I saw a picture of a Tesla service vehicle, and there on the back, just above the wheel, was this circular door. For what? Gasoline, right. But, so that, I don't know if that's a solution. Work from home up to 3 days a week where possible. So now we're back to the Charlie Vector days. Has anything really changed? The narrative and the reason has changed. We're going to keep you at home. We're going to keep you locked up. Because climate change. I mean, we are in what, the fourth or fifth 12-year cycle where the world's going to end because of climate change? They call us apocalyptic. urge car sharing and practices that decrease fuel use, alternate private car use in large cities. So anyway, they have all the answers. Here's another article. Russian oil shortfall threatens the biggest supply crisis in decades. Ukraine and Russia, which are at war now, who knows what the impact of the war is going to be? Probably won't have too much impact on planting going on in Russia because nobody's attacking Russia right now. But they account for about 40% of the world wheat supply. Certain countries, and I don't know if I have time to get it, but I'll give you a preview, get to it. Arab countries, they don't grow their wheat. You may not have noticed they live in a desert. And so countries like the United States, Ukraine, Russia supply a lot of the wheat in the world. Even China doesn't. They grow a lot of their stuff, but there's stuff they can't grow. And they don't have enough land to grow stuff for all the people that live there. So this is going to cause a supply chain issue. Supply goes down, demand, even if it stays level, what happens to the price? It goes up. Has anybody noticed a difference in the prices of stuff at the store? So we ran out of romaine lettuce this week. So I went down, I don't want to give it, I went to a store down around Polaris, and they had 2 bags of romaine. And I picked it up. They have like hearts of romaine. They have 3 hearts there. $6.99. I'm like, that can't be right. So I went over to the big grocery store chain, and they didn't even have any. They had a bag of romaine leaves that couldn't have weighed 3 ounces, and it was $3.99. So I do what everybody does when you want to have your knowledge increase. I got on a search engine, in this case Google, and I said, what's going on with the price of romaine? And you know what I found out? That the price of romaine is up more than any other food as a percentage. It's up 61%. Why? Because of supply chain issues, the farmers aren't growing it. So I have a place where I bought a lot of it yesterday for $5. And if you want to know where that is, you can go to Costco yourself. The thing that I'm tracking, I'll know that the world's getting better when they have those late July jalapeno lime chips back in stock. I'm stopping by Costco every other day just to see if they got that stuff. Well, this is it's not going to be in the best order, but I'm trying to make sense of it. So in the Atlantic, which is a left-leaning magazine, so you have to understand, look, I read a lot of different sources. I'll read the New York Times. I'll read the Washington Post. A lot of times I will cringe when I read it, and you have to learn how to read it. It's like sometimes you have to read 20 paragraphs into the story to get to the fact. They will put facts in there, but you got to go through 19 paragraphs of opinion before you get to it. And the Atlantic does some good work. So Graham Wood, who is spent a lot of time writing on the Middle East, he did an interview with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Now, Mohammed bin Salman is an interesting character. He's the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. The title of the article is Absolute Power. And here in the intro it says, ask about the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Mohammed bin Salman said, if that's the way we did things, Khashoggi would not even be among the top 1,000 people on the list. And he did say this, and this is kind of interesting, but he acknowledges that the fates of the 2 countries remain linked. In Washington, they're talking about United States and Israel. In Washington, many see MBS's rise as abetted, perhaps even made inevitable by American support. And there's no doubt we've supported Saudi Arabia for years. And there's been a mutual thing to it. They sell their oil in dollars. We like that in the United States. If you don't want that to happen, just wait till you see what happens if they start selling oil, if the dollar is no longer the reserve currency of the world. And there are people, China's pushing for it, Russia would like to see it, other people would like to see it, but it will have a huge impact on the United States. Inflation will go crazy. I mean, this is what happened to the British pound when it used to be the reserve currency of the world, and 100 years ago or so it started shifting to the dollar. When it shifts this time, it will be very, very quick that happens. He says there was a moment in time when the international community could have made it clear that the Khashoggi murder was the straw that broke the camel's back, and that we weren't willing to deal with MBS, Senator Murphy told me. The Trump administration's support when MBS was his most vulnerable saved him. That was the first trip that Trump made out of the country, was to Saudi Arabia, and then he went to Israel. The Trump administration's, Murphy said he owes no one bigger than Jared Kushner, Trump's personal envoy to the Crown Prince. You Americans think that there is something strange about a ruler who sends his unqualified son-in-law to conduct international relations, one Saudi analyst told me. For us, this is completely normal. Some still hope that MBS will not accede to the throne. Only one of the last 5 crown princes has eventually become king. Khalid al-Jabri noted to me optimistically, but everything I see suggests his ascent is certain and that the search for alternatives is forlorn. 2 of those 4 also ran crown princes were sidelined or replaced by MBS himself. The other 2 died of old age. And if you study the Saudi royal family tree from the king, the founding king back, it sort of changed names back in the early 1930s, King Abdul Aziz bin Ibn Saud. This guy was a character. He had a lot of wives. He had a lot of children. He was 6'8", pretty tall in the Arab world. Can you imagine this guy coming at you on a horse? Can you imagine this guy coming at you at 6'8"? I mean, that with a sword. That would be intimidating. I mean, I'm a tall guy, but I'm going to tell you what, you get a 6'8" guy, it gets a little uncomfortable, you know? And then you look, I mean, compared to, I saw a picture of Abdullah II of Jordan, who's sort of related, if you go back far enough to the Saud family, but he's like 5'3" or 4, I think. And I mean, Zelensky, that guy, I don't know how tall he is. He looks pretty short in the things that I've seen. So they've had this succession of brothers, the sons of Ibn Saud, that have ruled Saudi Arabia for 90 years. Well, for the 70 years since he died. And the first one in the next generation of grandsons will be Mohammed bin Salman. And there have been a couple of other crown princes. And like some other royal families, there's a little bit of sibling rivalry. And it happens in most families with 2 kids. Imagine if you had, 65 or 70 brothers, let alone sisters. Sibling rivalry, and also everybody had a lot of money. It can get a little bit dicey. So Mohammed bin Salman is rising and looks to be the next king of Saudi Arabia. And he's not going to do anything since then. So he came out in the interview. Now, this was not in the Atlantic paper, but the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia issued this thing that said, listen, this is what the Atlantic said. This is the transcript of the interview. The Prime Minister of Israel just paid an open visit to Abu Dhabi. Do you think that Saudi Arabia might follow some of these other Arab nations in having an open relationship, diplomatic relations with Israel? Now listen, I think he has what he's going to say in the interview. I think he has a somewhat different view. He seems to be very open to it, but because of the tribal nature of the society in which he's been raised, he's not going to go against his father while his father is alive, even though his father is very feeble and frail. And he said this, well, the agreement between the Gulf Coast countries states that no GCC country will take any action, political, security, economic action that harms other GCC countries. And all GCC countries have committed to this. Regardless of that, each country has independence to do whatever they want based on their views, and they have a total right to do whatever they think that's useful for UAE. For us, we hope that the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians is solved. We don't look at Israel as an enemy. We look to them as a potential ally with many interests that we can pursue together, but we have to solve some issues before we get to that. And one of those is the Palestinian issue. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end today, because that's coming up again. So the Iranian security chief, when he heard what the Crown Prince had said, he said, listen, you need to understand who really is the enemy of Muslims and Arabs. Well, who do you think the Iranian security chief said was the enemy of Muslims and Arabs? It was Israel, the little Satan. We're the big Satan. So this guy is the secretary of Iran's Supreme Council, Security Council. His name is Ali Shamkhani. And he made the remarks after he heard this, what he said. And so what was happening was when all this came out, Iran and Saudi Arabia were in bilateral talks to see if they could get things back on track. Now, the King of Saudi Arabia is known as the protector of the two holy mosques in Mecca and Medina, the holiest places to Muslims. They say that the third holiest is what? Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And that's under the control, administration of a Muslim holy man, the Waqf in Jerusalem, who is under the control of King Abdullah II of Jordan. When Saudi Arabia was being formed, King Abdullah's family was actually in control of the Mosque of Mecca and Medina 100 years ago. It was almost 100 years ago right now that they lost control of those to the Saud family. So the British, in sort of well, we don't want these guys to be totally left out in the cold. We will give them the control over Transjordan area, the Temple Mount, because the Ottomans had fallen apart. So they put this Waqf in place back in the 1920s when the Ottomans were done. And they also gave them, one of the members of the King Abdullah's family was a king of Iraq. So there were a couple kings of Iraq that were from the same family. And King Abdullah, he has a lot of money. I was researching this last year, and the estimates were that he makes $1 to $2 billion a year off of his investments. He's not destitute. So his country is, for a lot of reasons, but he seems to have a lot of money. And remember the Pandora Papers that came out and showed all these people that had properties all over the world, including a guy named Zelensky, who's the president of Ukraine. But anyway, so when this interview came out, Iran and Saudi Arabia were in negotiations. Shia Iran, Sunni Saudi Arabia. Oh, by the way, just as an aside, go look up Mordecai Kedar, Kedar. He's an Israeli Arab specialist, a brilliant man, Dr. Mordecai Kedar. And you can read his article. I've talked about it here, where the Temple Mount, and there are Saudi academics who are saying the Temple Mount is not where Muhammad ascended to heaven. It's not the farthest mosque. Now, does Mohammed bin Salman believe that? And he seems to be positioning himself with Israel, I think, to take over that administration from Jordan. And Jordan will fight tooth and nail to that. So this is all kind of interesting, really tribal politics when you get into it. But they're having these talks, Saudi Arabia and Iran. Mohammed bin Salman says this, then Saudi Arabia does this, and this is a announcement on the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia security website. They executed 81 people just this last week beheaded them. How many of you heard about this, by the way? A few of you did. Wasn't really publicized that much. Most of them were Shia. So what do you think happened to the talks that were going on between Saudi Arabia and Iran? Yeah, they were beheaded. They were cut off, just like a bunch of people's heads were. And then what do you have? You have Boris Johnson going, this is a great, I think, editorial cartoon from the Times of London, goes to Saudi Arabia to negotiate with them. Why would he do that? Well, we have a thing called a war, and, Russia supplies about a third of the oil in the world. Their oil supply is down. We're putting sanctions on them. We're trying not to buy the oil, not trying to buy their gas. And so they're going to Saudi Arabia and saying, hey, will you guys pump more oil so we don't have a big spike in oil prices, because a lot of us are going to lose elections. And I'm sure Mohammed bin Salman might say, Saudi royal family would say, what's an election? For the head of the country. I'm not sure I understand that concept. We also hear that the United Arab Emirates, which has a lot of oil, and Saudi Arabia have not taken the phone calls from the President of the United States, even though we've propped them up for a long time. Why? Because they view us as kind of weak right now. They like the strong man. They do. It kind of works in their culture. This is from the Munich Security Conference last month. Unity in a time of upheaval, evil. Anthony Guterres, who came out with a speech this week and said, we're on the brink of nuclear war, folks. I'm often asked whether we are in a new Cold War. My answer is that the threat to global security now is more complex and probably higher than at that time. So these just some great graphics. This is a picture of somebody, I don't remember what newspaper I got that of, maybe the Financial Times. Here's another one. This is sort of a picture of what's going on in Ukraine. People huddled in the subway. There's a lot of talk about how did Ukraine come in being? It's a very complicated story. And if you try to talk about it, you'll get yelled at by people. Oh, you don't understand history. You need to listen to this guy, or you need to listen to this person, and Putin is right. No, Putin is wrong. Ukraine is right. It's just Ukraine is wrong. And it's just all of a sudden you're in the midst of a big fight. Have any of you noticed that recently? And people getting unfriended? And this is among Christians, and this is concerning to me because it's complicated. And I try to look at, and I'm not saying I'm the best at it, I try to look at all sides of the issue. And so I said I thought that Putin kind of had a little bit of a beef about the way NATO was expanding towards his border. And he felt insecure. And people go, well, so you're all for them bombing apartment buildings in Kiev? No. Let's be nuanced. We can say Vladimir Putin has a point. Vladimir Putin bad. Ukraine has a point. Ukraine, some people are bad too. It's kind of nuanced. And they're half a world away, and we're not on the ground there, so we don't know exactly what's going on. But then, there's all this, it's hard to know whether you're getting the truth. And I've seen plenty of fake pictures used on the internet to describe what's going on in Ukraine right now. It's a fact. I mean, you can go find, people put the stuff, they find an explosion, like the Lebanon port explosion in Beirut a couple years ago. They put that up and say, look at what Russia's doing to Ukraine. Well, it's obvious if you look at it that it's not Ukraine. It's Beirut if you studied it. And they grab old photos of people like Zelensky in military fatigues and that type of thing. And I think it's pretty clear in some of his videos he's using a green screen with a background put in. So it gets very difficult to know exactly what the truth is. And I get sent people, they say, this is a fake photo. I'm like, so you're saying there's no bombing going on in Ukraine? No, I'm not saying that. It's just that all the news is fake. Well, not all the news is fake because there is bombs being dropped on Ukraine. You can't deny that. I talked to someone who was in Kiev last week, messaged with them this week. He said, it's awful. Now, Kiev was kind of normal at the time, but how long will that go down to Mariupol along the Black Sea? They're just to the east of the Crimean Peninsula, and ask the people there if things are normal. They're not. They're in the midst of a war. So they're talking about these thermobaric bombs and that type of thing. Look, Putin talked about this for a very long time, that he was not happy with the way NATO was acting. Whether he's right or wrong, I'm just telling you, this is a speech of his that he gave back in and look who's there in the front row, John McCain and Senator Lieberman. And he's saying one of the things he said is, listen, I am not happy with what's going on in Ukraine. And we've been talking about this for 15 years. This is 2007. And we have a lot of gas, and you're dependent on gas. Again, 15 years ago, Putin was talking to Europe about this. And maybe people didn't think he was serious. Here's a quote from, you can go to the, where's my... So you can go to the website. And so there's been this progression. This is from the Institute for the Study of War, about the evolution of the Kremlin's foreign policy, and things changed. You know, there was a period of time over which things changed between NATO and Russia. Now listen, I can take you to maps from, let's say, 1980, and if you put the Soviet Union in and include the Warsaw Pact of nations under their control, you know, so let's say here's NATO, here's Europe, here's Russia. What happened under the Warsaw Pact? Boom, Russia moved this way, right up against NATO. Now what happens? Soviet Union falls apart, and now NATO moves this way. So you got to understand, there's a whole history to the story here. And people were concerned about Russia back in those days. And I can show you videos of Vladimir Putin from a few years ago where he's saying, listen, you know, if we're threatened sufficiently enough, we'll use nuclear weapons. And I now get, oh, you don't understand what I understand what he's saying. He's saying, if you do the wrong thing, I'll use nuclear weapons. And you guys will all go to hell, because we're Christians and we'll go to paradise. That's what he said at Valdai in 2017. I played you the clip a couple weeks ago. But, you know, in geopolitics, half a world away, everybody's got a beef about everything. And so he gave this speech at the Munich Security Conference. And so he's... let's see. Well, here's the Bucharest Summit Declaration issued after he gave that speech. And it said, what did it say? NATO welcomes Ukraine and Georgia's Euro-Atlantic aspirations for membership in NATO. Now, I don't think either one of them are going to get NATO, because there's one country can veto the whole thing. But there were people pushing for it, knowing that it would punch his buttons. He did a essay last year, July of last year, early July, 6,600 words. And he just said on the historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians. He has an opinion on it. Hard to believe, isn't it? And so and this is a guy writing in the Wall Street Journal, the two blunders that caused the Ukraine war. And here's an old map that shows like early Russia, and it's based a lot in Ukraine, because the capital of this first sort of Russian empire was in Kiev, and the Russian Orthodox Church and Christianity came to Russia through there, and that plays into it, and there's this whole spirituality thing. And so now we have a war. And so the orangish area what would you call that, orange salmon color, whatever color you call that, is the areas that Russia seems to have control of as of the other day. Putin, the world has changed. There is a new world order. So now what's happened is our president and State Department people go to talk to President Xi of China, who's come out in support of Russia. And there is this, it's not very nice. So while Biden is talking to Xi and saying, listen, we're going to put sanctions on you if you do this, what is Xi's country doing at the same time? They're sending a warship through the Taiwan Straits. That's a message. You need to pay attention. And then Putin had this big rally the other day in a soccer stadium. And look at some of the things that he said. We, the multinational people of the Russian Federation, united by the common destiny on our own land. These are the first lines of Russia's fundamental law, the Constitution. And each of these words is filled with a deep sense, has a tremendous meaning. On our own land, united by the common destiny. For sure, this is what they thought and have been led by when they did this. In the referendum in Crimea and Sevastopol on March 8th, 2014, this is the 8-year anniversary of that. They lived on and live now on their own land and wanted to live the common destiny with their historic native country, with Russia. They have every right to do so, and they have achieved their goal. Let us first of all congratulate them on the occasion of this holiday. It is their holiday. Congratulations. Namely, to liberate the people from this genocide of these sufferings, because he claims that Ukrainian gangs are killing Russians. And there have been 14,000 people killed on both sides in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine. You know, I recollect these words from the Holy Scripture. Greater love has no one than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. Not sure what translation he's using. Apparently it's longer than Russian. It's a mere coincidence that the military operation started on the same day, which marks the birthday of one of our outstanding military commanders who has been canonized. 18th century Russian Navy admiral. He never lost a single battle during his brilliant military career. Once he said, these storms will contribute to Russia's glory, to Russia's glory. So it was then, as is now, and will be forever. So you see there's this big nationalism, spiritualism thing behind what's going on. Now, it's interesting, they had a guy there who sang. They called him the Kremlin crooner, Oleg Gazmanov. And he went on yesterday and he was singing here, Ukraine and Crimea, Belarus and Moldova, that is my country. And that's being shared around the internet. That's what he said. Is it true? I don't know. Is that the next step? There are things going on. For example, here's a tweet of a theater where people were hiding underneath the theater in Mariupol, and it was destroyed by the Russians. Listen, this is the best I can tell what's going on. I'm not on the ground there. This appears to have happened. Here's the president, Lukashenko, I think is his name, or Lukashenko, of Belarus. And he's giving a talk, an update, not a prophecy update, but an update, geopolitical update, to his cabinet. And he has a map there, and the map, it's pretty accurate in describing how Russia was going to attack. Now, Belarus is a Russian puppet government, if you will, and how they were going to attack. But then it looks like they're going into Moldova, because there's a Russian enclave there, right along the border. And there's some concern that Russia's going to try to take that over and invade Moldova. And are they going to go into Poland and Romania? So you can see that blue area on the eastern part of NATO's alliance, That was all the way over to buy the O in NATO back in the 80s. So it kind of works both ways. We were concerned about that. Now Russia's concerned that it's moved the other way and that the Baltic states are now in NATO. Putin doesn't like that. People are confused as to know what to do. This is the Arab. This is from Al-Quds newspaper. This is the translation and the reading of Arab analysts who are connected to American research centers, that the stage is delicate and requires the Arab countries to act with a lot of prudence at the moment of the emergence of the New World Order, which will range between the consolidation of the current system and the crystallization of a new system that will be a government led by the United States, and each of the Poles will have his share, not the Polish people, but the Poles of the Axis, and the power cards he owns. They argue that the Western American decision is taken to strip the energy card from Putin's hand and to solve the issue of the Russian nuclear weapon. Anyway, it is very complex what is going on. It's not easy to get to an easy area. So here's this thing that came out. Russian accusations are absurd, and in the back there's somebody from the State Department of Media holding a thing that says U.S.-funded biolabs in Ukraine. So look, I'm going to be fair about this. I'm going to play Laura Logan, who I have a lot of respect for, and I'll talk about the biolabs, but it may not be what you want. I just want you to understand it. And if you want to unsubscribe and never listen to me again, that's fine. But I've thought about this. I've done a lot of research on it. Anyway, so here's Laura Logan on whatever.
Okay, apparently she's not quite ready yet. Let's keep it going then.
I'm ready. Can you hear me?
There you are.
We got her.
Oh, well, it's so great. We didn't see you pop up right away. Laura, great to have you this morning. I wanted to start with this breaking news overnight that it appears, and there you are. You popped up for us. It's so great to see you. The Daily Mail has a very interesting story that's saying that Vladimir Putin essentially may be running out of bullets, that he might have a week and a half, 2 weeks max. He's losing warplanes, tanks, all the rest of it. He obviously went into this thinking he was going to bulldoze his way through Ukraine. He's obviously caused a lot of destruction. Don't want to minimize the fact there's over 2 million refugees. But this has not gone as well as Vladimir Putin expected.
I don't buy it for a second, Ed, I'll be honest with you. I really think that there's so much misinformation. We've never really seen anything like it. I mean, I've been covering wars now for 35 years, and I have never seen people with their nails done in the Ukrainian flag, right? I mean, we're being corralled into this box where we either have to hate Vladimir Putin and believe everything evil that's said about him and love Ukraine, and there's no in between. And that reminds me a lot of you're either, a white supremacist, or you go with the Democrat narrative on everything under the sun. So Vladimir Putin knew exactly what he was doing when he went into Ukraine. The Russian military isn't perfect. They, for example, I've spoken to multiple defense specialists and intelligence specialists from a Defense Intelligence Agency who've studied the Russian military for years. They do have a difficulty mounting complex air operations because they do very little training hours in comparison to, for example, the United States air assets, right, our fighter jet pilots. But Russia is not struggling. What Russia has done from the very beginning has been very strategic. They didn't go straight to Kiev. They went to all those bioweapons laboratories that are scattered all over the country. Some of them they built, so they know where they are. They've known where they are since the Soviet Union, because under the Defense Threat Reduction Program, we went in after the fall of the Soviet Union and supposedly turned those facilities from bioweapons labs into public health labs. Although, these days it's hard to believe anything that our leaders tell us, because they've lied about COVID, they lied about Russia collusion, they lied about the Ukraine impeachment trial, and there's so much more going on in Ukraine that nobody is talking about. You see such dishonesty when it comes to the history of Ukraine. You see dishonesty when it comes to the Azov Battalion, which is funded by the U.S. and NATO. I mean, you can find pictures of them online holding up the NATO flag and the swastika at the same time. Their own emblem contains the black sun of the occult, which was a Nazi SS emblem. And it also contains the sideways, lightning insignia of the SS. I mean, this is throughout the Ukrainian military. You can see that black sun of the occult on the.
Okay, so you can go find that on Getter, Rumble, BitChute. And look, I like Laura a lot, and she tells truth. That's why you don't see her too much anymore. But I'm not sure I agree with her on everything here. So we have this biolabs issue. So I'll just tell you how I sort of analyze the issue. So Ted Cruz asked Victoria Nuland, hey, Victoria, she's a assistant secretary of state. She's not a good person. She's been involved in a lot of really bad stuff. Hey, what about these biolabs? Now, when that happened, was it this week, I think, that they first came up? I read all of Vladimir Putin's speeches. I read his 6,600-page article. He wasn't talking about biolabs in Ukraine as a justification for going in there. And it appears that it came up from someone, and they said, hey, they're biolabs. That's really why Russia's going in there. So is that why they bombed the theater in Mariupol, where I hear today, this is, of course, you get it from Ukrainians, so you got to filter it. Is it true or not? 130 people got out there, maybe 1,300 people trapped in the rubble underneath that. And were all the apartment buildings, and there have been hundreds of apartment buildings bombed. Are those all biolabs? Now, there are a lot of biolabs in the United States. They serve a purpose. There are different levels of biolabs. So some of them that were taken over from the Soviet Union, when it collapsed 30 years ago, were weapons labs. And some of those materials, you can't flush them down the toilet. That would distribute them into the population. So the United States did do a program, and I'm not saying the United States is perfect in all this, and we may be doing some black ops. I don't know. You don't know. You're not on the ground there. But take a map of the biolabs that we know about and overlay it with where all the bombings are falling, and I'm going to say that they don't match up. Because when it started circulating that there are biolabs there, this is the reason Russia went in. It's not the reason Russia went in. Vladimir Putin's been telling us for 15 years why he's going in. And it never was biolabs. But there could be really bad biolabs. We have biolabs all over the United States. How many biolabs did they have down at Ohio State? And some of them serve a function. There was a big article in the New York Times last Sunday. There's a virus or a bacteria that's killing off large numbers of bison, buffalo out in South Dakota. And they get really bad cough, lung problems. Now, I was near a bison last summer, and when they breathe, you can hear it, let alone when they're coughing and hacking. So imagine you, like the worst cold you ever had, and you weigh 2,000 pounds. It's a problem. Well, they take that, they isolate what the entity is, the virus or bacteria that's causing that, and they will store it in a biolab so that they can run tests to compare it to what the bison have. They isolate and run their tests. So the biolabs serve a perfectly good function, particularly in a heavily agricultural country like Ukraine. But there are bad biolabs too. And I don't know if we're running those. It wouldn't surprise me. But I think we need to look at it a little bit more nuanced over time. And it never came up until people started talking about it here in the United States. Russia never talked about it. So that leads me to believe that there's some propaganda built in behind this, because Russia saw, hey, that's really getting us a lot of traction with people in the United States, so we're going to push that narrative. So I'm just going to be honest with you, I don't know. But I mean, these pictures of destroyed apartment buildings, and so what Russia will say, oh, well, that's where the neo-Nazis, they kicked out all the residents in the neo-Nazi Azov gang. These white supremacists were hiding there. Now, I talked to somebody who was in Ukraine recently. I'm trying to find out how big this gang is. I'm told that it's a very small percentage the size, like single digits, small single digits, low single digits of the Ukrainian army. Because the Ukrainian government, this Zelensky guy, he's a lefty. The Ukrainian government is a bunch of lefties. So I don't think it's fair. They have white supremacists. We have white supremacists here in the United States. We can't deny that. Drive through some of the rural roads I've driven on in Ohio, and you'll find some of these people. Don't stop and ask them if they're white supremacists. That probably would not be good. So, sure, they're bad people there, okay? And the leftist government and what they support is not what I would support. But, you know, now everybody in our government is saying, oh, you got to support Ukraine, you got to do this. Drones are being used. I don't know how well it's going or not for Russia. I'm not on the ground there. Reports are that there have been a lot of Russian soldiers killed. A lot are deserting. That somewhat could be true. It could also be somewhat propaganda. But my point in all of this is, let's talk about it. Let's analyze it rationally. And we're getting propaganda from our government. I know we're getting propaganda from Russia, and I know we're getting propaganda from Ukraine. But these Christian people running around unfriending people, blocking them, telling them they're going to go to hell if they believe that Vladimir Putin is a good guy or Vladimir Putin is a bad guy, on and on and on. It's really tiring. But this is prophetic, because does it not say that brother will turn against brother in the end time? And you're seeing it on so many different levels. And they've caused this problem. Because this is the world we live in. Panic buying in Europe and the Middle East. COVID lockdowns and fear of sanctions dent China stocks. People are wondering, how is this all going to play out? We have this ESG stuff that's being used. Environment, social, and governance. In my view, it's a fraud. And there's a lot of fraud tied into the stock market now, because companies are pumping up their ESG ratings when they're not really green or anything, or woke or that, or they're becoming so woke that they're completely missing their mission. And here's what Putin did yesterday. This was kind of an escalation. He launched his Dagger missile that I talked about a couple weeks ago. Here's a MiG picture of it yesterday. And then you see the little video that the Russian Ministry of Defense released showing that hypersonic missile flying into Ukraine. Now, one of the problems that's come out of this, and this is what I would call the Syriazation, not Syriazation, Syriazation of the war, because Putin has been involved in Syria since 2015. What you're seeing is the Russian method of conducting warfare. So whether it's going good for them or not, they may not be able to sustain the air thing that Laura Logan was talking about because they don't train enough. Tanks may be on the way out. It's hard to get tanks, the supply, they don't get good gas mileage. They don't run on electricity. So you got to get gas to them, and they can get bogged down, particularly now since the ground is starting to melt in Ukraine and it's muddy and not frozen. This is all problematic. And so it may be that things aren't going as well as Putin said. There have been 4 generals killed. There have been a number of security and military people arrested in Russia. You can't say anything in Russia or you're going to get arrested. But what do we have now is, okay, these are the countries that import the most Russian gas, and it goes across Ukraine in a lot of ways. But the other thing we're seeing is this massive influx of refugees from Ukraine into Poland, Romania, Moldova, and some of the other countries that are completely taxing those countries. We're talking 3.5, 4 million people or more so far, 10% of the country. In addition to that, another 6.5 million to 8 million people are internally displaced within Ukraine that are still staying there. That means 10% of the country, of 40 million people, are not living where they lived 3 weeks ago. That is a massive influx. And it's taxing the authorities in Poland, where a friend of mine was recently, and he said it's just unlike you can't believe. Now remember this is a map. You can get it at lucify.com. Just look for Lucify. I know it's kind of a weird name. Lucify.com, refugee flow. And so back in 2014 and 15, this is a graph, and you can see the Mediterranean down here. You see Syria, you see Afghanistan, you see Pakistan, and you see the refugee flow out mainly out of the Middle East because of the Syrian civil war flowing into Europe. And Germany got 1 million refugees during that time. All those little dots are representing people. And this is just over like about a 1-year period of this. It's a fascinating map. Just go and look at it. Understand, though, that what's happened with regard to the Ukraine war thus far is probably twice. Remember all the videos and we talked about it for weeks and months, what was going on in 2015 and the impact it was having on Europe, particularly because they came from a different culture. And now it's upsetting the demographics because white European culture is not reproducing. White Russian culture is not reproducing. Japanese culture is not reproducing. Chinese culture is not reproducing. There is a people group that is reproducing. And they have a different worldview, and it's changing the world. And you understand, this is part of what I think is this acceleration convergence thing about the end times. This is a big part of it. Now we've got, in 3 weeks, we got what took 2 years to do back in the mid-20 teens. This is a big deal. And so the Syrian refugees came through Turkey, through Greece, across the Mediterranean, and Africa. They're coming by like crazy. And the Africa demographics are spiking. They're going up. So if you look at what happened, this is a soccer field. So if you look at up to 2017, the Syrian refugees into Europe could stand shoulder to shoulder on 15 soccer fields. That's a lot of people. Understand, though, that in Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon mainly, it would take 79 soccer fields for all the refugees to stand on. Over 5 times as many. I don't think we understand how this world has changed. And what happened was the world changed, the Syriization. Look what happened in Syria. Assad was having problems. With Russian support, he went in and reduced cities like Aleppo, which were heavily Sunni, and a problem for Assad, as the General McKenzie said from NATO, I think it was McKenzie, who was head of NATO, said, listen, it's clear what they did. They bombed these places so that people would get on the road and become somebody else's problem. And what do you see happening now in Ukraine? The same thing. The people are being bombed and they're leaving. And the economic impact is not to be minimized. The D-Day invasion with the allies of Britain, Canada, and the United States mainly, onto the beaches of Normandy in 1944, June 6, 1944, involved 150,000 people. It is estimated that this month on the US border, there will be migrants totaling 175 or 180,000 this month. There are also reports coming out of the Biden administration that it could be 400,000 100,000 people in a migration wave. Folks, the people are changing the world. Whether it's Putin, our government, other governments, we live at a time where things are being changed. And so now here is this speculation. What's going to happen? How is this going to play out? We try to go to China. They don't seem to be helpful here. But this is kind of an interesting article written by a Chinese academic, possible outcomes of the Russia-Ukrainian war and China's choice. I would highly recommend that you go read it. It's been downloaded millions of times. So go to the US-China Perception Monitor, or go to Google or DuckDuckGo, whatever you want, possible outcomes of the Russia-Ukrainian war and China's choice. And essentially it says China should not align with Russia in this. This is a Chinese university academic writing this. Now, immediately you think, like, how's he getting away with this? Is he allowed to do this? And the answer is, right now, he's getting away with it. What does that mean? It could mean that it could be a propaganda piece that China's put out to kind of feel the waters for how this is going to kind of react in Chinese society and that type of thing. And they're having social media wars over this in China right now, this article. It even made the front page of the New York Times yesterday or today, evading Beijing's Chinese censorship to rally Chinese against the war, criticism in a country supportive of Russia. And everybody's like, what is going on? And the answer is, this is just one of the other factors that we got to figure in this very complicated world where the whole world order is changing. In less than a month, it's happened. And so here we are. Supply chains, gas prices, food prices up. And it's interesting, even the New York Times, this is their Sunday review section this morning, America has a free speech problem. This is the New York Times saying this. Oh, wait a minute. I thought they were part of it. This is how this combobulated the whole world is right now. The New York Times complaining about free speech. Well, maybe they have an agenda. Look at what they did this week. There was a certain laptop that was identified by the New York Post as coming from the son of a very prominent politician in the United States. And what did everybody say? Fake news, fake, that's fake. Here's what the New York Times article says. I will read you the page. This is the 20th or 24th paragraph in the article. Got to read a lot of garbage till you get to the meat. People familiar with the investigation said prosecutors had examined emails between certain prominent politician, Mr. Archer, and others about Burisma, a Ukrainian company, and other foreign business activity. Those emails were obtained by the New York Times from a cache of files that appears to have come from a laptop abandoned by the son of a prominent politician in a Delaware repair shop. The email and others in the cache were authenticated by people familiar with them and with the investigation. So are they going to apologize for all the people that got kicked off at Twitter for talking about this? For Leslie Stahl, when President Trump brought it up in an interview, say that's just a bunch of fake news, Mr. President. You're not allowed to say that on my show. I'm waiting, Leslie Stahl. I'm waiting for all of you to repent of the lies that you told when it was obvious. And it may have brought about a different result. Here's an article from the Tablet. So this whole thing is so crazy because we're doing everything to sanction Russia, right? But who is the Biden administration running to for help in the Iranian negotiations over the nuclear deal? Russia. And this is an article in Tablet. Accommodating Iran will be no more successful than accommodating Russia. This report out of Israel that last year they accepted 2 Iranian drones that were flying in. And remember that this is, here, I think this has got audio.
What has accelerated in the last year is the influence of China and Russia, which each in their own way are attempting to subvert the rules-based international order and to gain strategic influence in the Middle East. China's activity in the region takes the form of economic investment, arms sales, and other overtures. Russia has made an 18th century power play in Syria, propping up the murderous Assad regime. The Middle East remains key terrain, and I believe China and Russia will continue to expand their efforts to improve their position in the region and diminish U.S. standing wherever possible. The CENTCOM area of responsibility is the most cyber-contested theater in the world. It is also the proving ground for the proliferation and employment of unmanned weaponized systems, many emanating from Iran.
And so he also said, this was testimony he gave to Congress last year, but during this hearing before Congress, he's the head of CENTCOM. He's retiring soon. For the first time since the Korean War, we, the United States, are operating without complete air superiority because of these drones. That's why I talk about them all the time. This is changing warfare. It's making it asymmetrical. And Ukraine's doing pretty well with drones and Javelin infantry-fired missiles, taking out all these tanks. And so war is changing. Now Russia puts in their hypersonic missile. Iran is said to have 3,000 ballistic missiles itself that can reach Iran. This shows their progression as to what they're going to do. They shouldn't be doing this, but they, despite sanctions and everything, they're moving forward with their missile program and their nuclear program. Melanie Phillips has a great article. I think the headline says it all. Iran is brazenly playing the West for suckers. By caving into the nuclear demands of the Islamic Republic, Biden has surrendered to fanatics. And they're talking about giving them like $100 billion. What do you think they're going to do with that money when these sanctions are lifted? And now Russia's throwing things in. Well, if your sanctions are going to hurt us, then we won't go to them with that part of the deal. And the talks have broken down. And who knows if they're going to get any kind of a deal. Just real quickly, I mentioned this last week. Herzog, the president of Israel, it's a ceremonial type position, but he went to Turkey. Now, I don't know if Israel was planning on doing this or not. Erdogan sort of forced the meeting, and what he would do is he would say, hey, Israel's coming to meet with me. And then Israel's like, if they don't go, then they lose face. And in that culture, that's kind of bad. So they went and they met with him. And Iran hit they said Israeli sites or American sites in Erbil in the Kurdish regions of Iraq last week. A lot of people are upset about that. There's a lot of talk, is China going to continue to support Russia and all this mess? I'm going to talk a little bit about cryptocurrency and everything in a future update, because the government came out this week. This is an interesting article from the Financial Times last year. Central banks are realizing CBDCs, get familiar with that term. That's central bank digital currencies will have to be intimately linked to your identity to deal with illicit finance and bank disintermediation risk. There are practice groups. I'm telling you, when you see lawyers forming practice groups on something, you know it's a big deal because somebody's going to make money off it. So there are cryptocurrency practice groups, digital identity practice groups. There are transgender practice groups, ESG practice groups, diversity, equity, and inclusion practice groups, because those are hot practice areas right now. This article about Bretton Woods 3, a crisis is unfolding, a crisis of commodities. Commodities are collateral and collateral is money, and this crisis is about the rising allure of outside money over inside money. And they're talking about things are going to change. And Turkey's involved in a lot of this. This was kind of an interesting thing, though. When Herzog went to Turkey, everybody says, well, Erdogan, he's getting pro-Israel now. Don't believe it. There's all reasons not to believe this. I could do a whole update just on this. But in a museum in Ankara, the Museum of Archaeology, is a stone that was found back in the 1880s in Hezekiah's tunnel there by the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And here's an article in Al Akbar on February 9th talking about this, and they're saying, now this is a Hezbollah-related newspaper. Here's a picture of the inscription of the stone. Here's a little bit better picture, and then here's somebody wrote it out. And most archaeologists say, well, that's Hebrew. It's an early version of Hebrew, and it talks about things in the Middle East. So this article in Al Akbar says, oh, no, that's Canaanite language. There were no Jews there back in that day. And so now we have the lies being told yet again. Turkey is operating in a very interesting fashion. This article from this morning's Israel Hayom says, just don't believe what Erdogan is doing. But the other thing they did, there's some areas that Russia has a problem. They don't have a warm water port except on the Crimean Peninsula, on the Black Sea. You see these little narrow openings to get to the Mediterranean? So the one is the Crimean Peninsula, the Kerch Strait, I think it's called. That's the Sea of Azov above that. Then the Black Sea. Then you have the Bosporus at Istanbul, and then you have the Dardanelles. And this week, Turkey, despite all of its financial problems, opened the longest suspension bridge on the planet between the Dardanelles. You used to take an hour by ferry. Now you can drive over it in 6 minutes. It's 4,000 some meters long. Turkey's also trying to get the gas pipeline to go up through Turkey instead of across the Mediterranean. And a lot of people are talking about, would this be a reason for somebody to invade Israel in the last days, for Russia to come down to get Israeli gas? And I'm saying that could be. That pipeline's not ready to go. They don't have liquefied natural gas facilities built yet to handle the amount that it would put out. The straits there the ocean there between Cyprus and Crete is 3,000 meters deep. That's a big engineering feat to get a gas pipeline through there. But they're saying, well, just come up right up through there between Cyprus and Syria to Turkey, because we got all kinds of pipelines. And that's what Erdogan would like. That thing is a few years away from happening. Speaking of the East Med, there's a big air exercise there tomorrow. So, let me see here. Well, we're way over time, so I'm going to finish with this. This will just take a few minutes. I did a midweek update, and this was in the Italian newspaper Libero. Front page. Headline says, "The Pope sees the end of the world." This was this week. So I did like 15 minutes on this in the middle of the week, but I'll sort of summarize it here. The headline on the right-hand page on the inside there says, "The Pope now fears the end of the world." That's what I titled the update that I did. Ukrainian Catholic bishops had called for the consecration of Russia as requested by Fatima. And the Pope, in response to that, issued this tweet this week, Tuesday, on Friday, 25 March, during the celebration of penance in St. Peter's Basilica, "I will consecrate Russia in Ukraine to the Immaculate Heart of Mary." Now, March 25th date is important in Catholic tradition. It's the date of creation of Adam and Eve. It's the date of the Annunciation, when Mary became with child by the Holy Ghost, and it is also the day of the crucifixion. Now, I don't buy any of those, but I'm just saying, and we'll talk a little bit next week about the triumphal entry, about maybe some of the dates, and none of them will be March 25th. But here is this thing at Fatima. It happened in 1917. In 2017, on the 100th anniversary, Pope Francis went to the 100th anniversary celebration of the vision that these three shepherd children had had of the Virgin Mary. I think, my view, thing was demonic. They got prophecies from the Virgin Mary that the world and Russia some controversy as to what the third one was. Some people say it was, if Russia was consecrated to the heart of Mary, the world would have peace. Now, but filter this through an end times thing where people are going to be talking about peace. Okay? And now you have the Pope going there. And here is this crowd gathered, a huge, it's like the size of St. Peter's, Vatican Square there in Rome. Tens of thousands of people. And you'll see that they parade this statue around. Here's the Pope praying at the statue. By the way, I don't support any of this. As I said, I think this whole thing is false, but I'm just saying is that at this time, when there is this war going on, now here comes the Pope to step in, to call for world peace. He had issued an encyclical letter a year or two ago about Laudato Si, on care for our common home, environmentalism, bringing in pagan idols into the Vatican. And then here is his document on human fraternity that he signed with the leading Sunni theologian in the world. And so now the point of this is you have somebody trying to unite the religions of the world and pushing for peace. I mean, we've been talking about this stuff in prophecy for a long time. And then you have this. I have to play this clip, a couple minutes long. This is Vladimir, is that his first name? Zelensky, speaking to the US Congress. What's that? Well, he will. Oh, he's yeah, he's using social media like crazy.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Madam Ambassador is with us this morning, Madam Ambassador. Sending to you the President of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky. Slava Ukraina! Slava Ukraina!
I think that means glory to Ukraine or something.
Glory to heroes.
And in the end, to sum it up, today it's not enough to be the leader of the nation. Today it takes to be the leader of the world. Being the leader of the world means to be the leader of peace. Peace in your country doesn't depend anymore only on you and your people. It depends on those next to you, on those who are strong. Strong doesn't mean weak. Strong is brave and ready to fight for the life of his citizens and citizens of the world, for human rights, for freedom, for the right to live decently and to die when your time comes, and not when it's wanted by someone else, by your neighbor. Today, the Ukrainian people are defending not only Ukraine, we are fighting for the values of Europe and the world, sacrificing our lives in the name of the future. That's why today the American people are helping not just Ukraine, but Europe and the world to keep the planet alive, to keep justice in history. Now I'm almost 45 years old. Today my age stopped when the hearts of more than 100 children stopped beating. I see no sense in life if it cannot stop the death. And this is my main mission as the leader of my people, great Ukrainians. And as the leader of my nation, I'm addressing the President Biden. You are the leader of the nation, of your great nation. I wish you to be the leader of the world. Being the leader of the world means to be the leader of peace. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
So there you have it. And so, now people are speculating, is Zelensky the guy and that type of thing. Remember, there was a speculation about this is my Photoshop of the Economist cover about Macron was walking on water in their cover. I put him as he was sinking and going down. And the interesting thing about this is you see that thing on his hat? Do you remember when Macron was brought out as the new president of France in 2017, just 5 years ago? This is what led to a lot of the speculation. This very orchestrated, ceremony that was done in front of that pyramid there at the Louvre in Paris, singing the European national anthem, or the European anthem, hard to call it, multinational anthem, I guess. And you remember this is his, when he's giving his victory speech, just look at the imagery here. And I'm just saying, as people speculate about who is the Antichrist, and I don't know, there you can just barely see the eye and the pyramid right above his head. Very, very strange time. You see that? It's just bizarre. So now, look, everybody's speculating, and look, you can speculate and everything, but remember, we're all speculating, and there will be rumors of speculation. You're going to see a lot of this. The important thing is that the body of Christ should not be dividing over these issues. That's what I think. At any time, a guy who I don't even think he's a futurist in terms of Bible eschatology, said, hey, if you're not going to help the people in Ukraine who are suffering, I don't want to hear your opinion about who's at fault and who's not and what should be done. There's something we can do to help those people that are suffering. A lot of Russians are leaving Russia at the same time. I mean, this is a massive move of people that has not been seen since World War II, at least. This is changing the world. The governments of the world are changing. And I'm going to set this, I will do a midweek update this week if I can get the time together. And it's not over 70. If it's over 70, then I have other plans. Which I did this week, but a lot of things going on in the Middle East with regard to Israel and what our State Department is doing that are not helpful. And Israel is it's a very difficult situation for Israel to navigate. What's Iran doing? What's going to happen? This article on the tablet, you might want to read, I'll reference it in my midweek thing. Biden blames the Jews for his Ukraine policy. I read the article, it's very accurate. The president and his people try to seal a new Iran deal by hanging their appeasement of Putin on Israel. This is very troubling, very troubling. And I don't think it bodes well for the United States to be doing this. So I'll talk about that in the midweek. There is a lot of stuff going on. I have some things that were enacted into law in the United States this week. I'm just going to say we seem to be pushing Israel to divide the land. And when that happens, we have things like this. This is the drought outlook. Continue or worsen, the brown area. A lot of food grown out there. We were out in Colorado and Nebraska and Kansas last year, and I'm telling you, the crops did not look good. Now we have 40% of the world's wheat, and it's questionable whether it's going to be grown this year. This is going to be a difficult time, but God is faithful. But we need to be wise as serpent, harmless as doves, and act like the people of God. So let's pray. Lord, thanks for your day. Lord, I just pray that you will give us the strength to stand firm in our faith in an evil time, and to give us opportunities to share the gospel with those around us. And that we should not be overtaken by a spirit of fear, but understand that we have the power of the Holy Spirit in us to act appropriately and to tell the truth to people, to share the gospel, and pray you'll give us those opportunities. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.